The first reading from the prophet Micah contains some of the most beautiful passages in the whole of the writings of these old prophets. It's this: "What is good has been explained to you, man. This is what the Lord asks of you. Only this, to act justly, to love tenderly, and to walk humbly with your God." This was chosen for this King Henry because he acted very justly, but also walked interiorly very much in the presence of God, humbly with your God. To walk humbly with our God is a whole program of life. How many of you know in school or elsewhere a person who is noisy, always speaks loudly, always speaks a lot, always knows everything? I would say that it's the common experience of every classroom. There's usually somebody who fits perfectly into that category. Well, a person who knows a lot is in danger of going through life with the quantity he has remaining what it is. Why? Because he's deflecting new knowledge. He's too full of what he has already acquired. A humble person, by tendency, is fairly quiet, because humility is naturally expressed by a tone of voice, a tone of behavior which is not heavy, not invasive, not the center of the stage. E.g., we're in a conversation. Who's doing the talking? There's a profound difference between a conversation between two people who are good at listening, good at picking up, and people who are not. You who are married will know something about this, because you have to dialogue sometimes seriously. And the secret of a good marriage will be the capacity precisely to pick up and to reach some agreement in common, having listened to all that's involved. Not much is resolved by insisting, and keeping to only what I know. But this then extends to God. That same quietness before God is kind of important. Do you know people who, when they go into prayer, maybe in church, are never able to be quiet? Go into some places of adoration and you'll find somebody, probably for the whole hour, whispering prayers. It's very Irish, it's very pious, but they're bombarding even Jesus, and he can't get a word in edgeways. They've done their duty, and they're that much holier, but he hasn't got through to them. The same principle, they're deflecting new rays. So, I would like to propose to you a model which I learned years ago when a student. My best friend in those days was a future Anglican clergyman. We'd grown up together, and his father was an Anglican clergyman, as was his grandfather. And he was in Oxford while I was in Wales, and I'd go and visit him and he'd go and visit me. And when I was there, he would take me around the high places of Anglicanism in Oxford, e.g. the ultra-high place, Pusey House. And he introduced me to the Reverend Cheslin Jones, who was the head of that place. And he was talking about his place. And I overheard this conversation between them. The principal said, Paul, The Anglican Church. The Anglican Church is a zoo in which every animal can do his own thing, as long as he doesn't get in the way of the animal in the cage next to him. So, interesting conversation between Anglicans. I would go around places with him, and he took me eventually to one who was sort of his spiritual director, a high Anglican clergyman who was by then chaplain to a convent of Anglican nuns just outside Oxford. And so we got to him, and I knew his technique because Paul had described it. It went something like this. Paul. Silence. So he had to talk, you see, he had to talk. He had to talk. And eventually he'd say something. Got to the end of his sentence. And then more silence. So Paul would have to talk, you see. So I copped on, and we referred to it ever more as the vacuum cleaner tactic. So by obliging the other person to talk, he knew by the end of the conversation all the hidden bits, and only at the end would he pinpoint what was to be done, because he knew all the elements of the problem. Look at the average conversation, and it goes something like this. One person starts to talk because he wants to get to a point. The other person immediately jumps in at the first point, which is only the beginning of a long discourse. So the discourse will never happen. And you get into warfare over this first point. Many a conversation never starts. I remember one time, I shouldn't be telling you this, but I will. It was in the monastery. We had this important meeting, and I was about to tell them, but I was thinking actually of coming away. And so I started on my discourse, and immediately the first point was the point of, as it were, all importance. So it wasn't at all, it was only what we call a preamble. So what did I do? I deliberately dismissed this, because I could see what was ahead, and got straight to the point, which eventually got them to calm down and see what was important in certain discourses. But it happens in holy places. How much more will it happen between the non-professional? So I leave you with that. Listening is an art. It's the same faculty with him and with each other. And it's made of humility. And yes, let's say it, the vacuum cleaner tactic.